In this tutorial, we'll create a small story to learn the basic features of causality. But first, let's look at the 4 main ways of getting around. First, you can take any view full screen using the Escape or tilde key. Simply click a view and press Escape. Full screen whiteboard is great for when you're designing stories. And full screen script is great for just writing. Secondly, you can move around in the whiteboard by pressing any blank area and dragging. You have to avoid clicking the objects. But if you hold the spacebar while dragging, you can click anywhere. Thirdly, you zoom in the whiteboard by pressing the Tab key. This toggles between an overview zoom level and a zoom level appropriate for work. You can also press Shift-Tab to see the whole story. And you can use Command and scroll wheel to get to any zoom level. And finally, there's the Push tool, which lets you open up space in the whiteboard. Simply hold the Command key and drag. And the same to shrink gaps. So now let's develop a dummy story and do every single step. You can find this same tutorial in written form at docs.hollywoodcamerawork.com. First, create a new document in the File menu. Next, drag a lane icon from the bottom and drop it above the default lane to create a new lane. A typical story might have 10 or 15 lanes. Don't overdo them, just create lanes for major storylines. Double-click the lane and call it Bank Robbery. And double-click the old lane and call it Relationship Arc. Next, drag a block into the first lane. Leave it as a story block and call it Getting into the Bank. Subtext blocks are a more advanced technique for handling your subtext, but you don't need to worry about it for now. And let's drag out the edges of this block. Now let's create some plot. We'll drag in beats from the bottom. Notice that when we create a beat, a snippet is automatically created. And let's single-click this beat and call it Getting Past the Security Guard at the Entrance. Let's create a second beat, but this time we'll just double-click where we want it and call it Phone in a Terrorist Threat. A thing to notice is how the whiteboard goes left to right. It's the horizontal position of beats that controls their place in the script. So even if we move it up and down, the order in the script doesn't change. Let's try to swap the order by dragging Phone in a Terrorist Threat to the left of the beat about the security guard. Notice how it's now before it in the script. And let's swap their order again, this time in the script. And you'll notice that the order changes in the whiteboard. Everything you do in the script is reflected in the whiteboard. Same way, let's create a snippet by right-clicking the title of Phone in a Terrorist Threat and selecting Insert Snippet. And immediately a beat is created in the appropriate place in the whiteboard. Let's rename the snippet by double-clicking the title and calling it Secretly Jam the Door. Next, let's work with groups. Groups are just ways to keep related beats together. Drag in a group from the toolbar and place it to the right of the beats. Double-click the group and rename it to The Vault, which will be a sequence about breaking into the vault. To create the first beat, simply double-click in the group. And let's call it Enable Magnetic Pulse to Jam Cameras. You can also create beats by pressing Enter and Shift-Enter on the keyboard. Let's press Enter to create a beat after called Shoot the Guard. Now click the magnetic pulse thing again, and this time press Shift-Enter to create a beat before. And let's call it Retrieve Hidden Bag of Explosives. These are now a sequence that will happen back to back. Next, let's turn our attention to the lane called Relationship Arc. First, double-click and rename the first block to the Relationship Sours. And then double-click the first beat and rename it to Janet grunts at Michael for having forgotten some tools. Next, let's expand the edge of this block to have more elbow room. And then, let's create some more beats about the relationship problems. First, that Michael asks Janet to pick up something he dropped, but she says to do it himself. And that Janet is annoyed that Michael is taking too long with the detonation cord. What we're doing here is building a parallel storyline about the relationship that will now intercut with the bank robbery. First, let's use the Push tool to open up some space. Hold the Command key and drag Phone in a Terrorist Threat. That opens up some space after secretly jam the door. In the relationship block, let's now drag the beat Janet grunts at Michael into that horizontal space. If you look in the script, the relationship storyline is now intercutting with getting into the bank. They get past the security guard. Then they secretly jam the door. Then Janet complains that he forgot the tools. And then they phone in the terrorist threat. If we feel inspired, let's go ahead and write some of the screenplay for it. Let's do another intercut. In the group called The Vault, again command drag the magnetic pulse thing to open up some space. Pushing works everywhere, even inside groups. And let's now move the Michael asks Janet to pick up beat to intercut in that gap. And let's again write some screenplay for it. So now the flow is that they get the bag of explosives. Then Michael asks her to pick something up. Then they enable the magnetic pulses and shoot the guard. It works pretty well to have this relationship storyline happening while they're breaking in. So that's our little story. We strongly recommend that you stop here and work with Causality before watching any more tutorials. The steps we took in this tutorial are the meat and potatoes of working in Causality, and you can get very far just with these few tools.